The Last Will. My name is Jack. I'm 35, and this is a story of how a will tore my family apart. Growing up, I always knew I was different from the rest of my family. My father, Robert, 68 male, was a successful businessman, and our family lived a comfortable life in a suburban neighborhood. My mother passed away when I was young, and when I was 10, Dad remarried a woman named Sarah, 55 female. She had a daughter from a previous marriage, Lily, 28 male, who quickly became the golden child. Lily was everything my dad and Sarah wanted in a child: beautiful, charming, and obedient. As for me, I was the opposite: quiet, reserved, and always questioning things. My relationship with Sarah was strange from the start. She saw me as a reminder of my father's previous life, a life she wasn't a part of. Dad, who had always been my rock, began to distance himself, wrapped up in his new life with Sarah and Lily. As the years went by, I learned to live with the fact that I wasn't the favorite child. I focused on my studies, earned a degree in engineering, and moved out as soon as I could to start my own life. I stayed in touch with Dad, but our conversations were always surface level, never delving into anything too personal. We both knew that the closeness we once had was gone. I wasn't surprised when Dad started giving more attention to Lily, especially as she grew older. She was the perfect daughter in his eyes, and Sarah made sure he knew it. I often wondered what would happen when Dad was gone, who would inherit what, but I never expected things to turn out the way they did. A few months ago, I received a call that would change everything. Dad had suffered a heart attack. By the time I reached the hospital, it was too late. He was gone. The shock hit me hard, but what came next was even worse. After the funeral, Sarah gathered the family at the house. I arrived feeling like an outsider, just like I always had. Lily was there, of course, sitting close to Sarah, her eyes red from crying, but still managing to look poised and composed. My aunts and uncles were also present, though they seemed more interested in the upcoming reading of the will than in grieving. The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, an old friend of the family, arrived with a briefcase full of documents. I watched as he set up in the living room, the tension in the air thickening. I could tell by the way Sarah kept glancing at him that she expected something big, and Lily had a look of quiet confidence, as if she already knew she was getting everything. But when Mr. Thompson started reading the will, the room fell silent. It began as expected. Dad left small sums to various relatives, a few charitable donations, and then he got to the main point. "And to my son Jack," Mr. Thompson read, "I leave the entirety of my estate, including all financial assets, properties, and business holdings." There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by an explosion of voices. Sarah shot to her feet, her face flushed with anger. "That's impossible. Robert would never do that. That estate goes to Lily." Lily's expression had gone from confident to shocked, her hands trembling as she stared at Mr. Thompson. My aunts and uncles, who had been eyeing their potential inheritance, were now whispering furiously among themselves, their greedy hopes dashed. As for me, I was in shock. I never expected this. My father and I had grown apart over the years, and I had no idea he was planning to leave everything to me. I felt a mix of emotions: guilt, confusion, and a small, selfish spark of vindication. The days following the reading of the will were a blur. Sarah refused to accept it. She called Mr. Thompson repeatedly, demanding to know if there was a mistake, if Dad had been coerced or manipulated. My aunts and uncles were no better. They believed that I had somehow tricked Dad into leaving me everything, that I had taken advantage of him in his final days. Sarah began spreading rumors among the family, telling anyone who would listen that I had manipulated my father, that I was selfish and ungrateful. Lily, though outwardly silent, seemed to support her mother's narrative. I could see the way she looked at me, like I had stolen something that was rightfully hers. Then came the threats. Sarah, in a fit of rage, told me she would contest the will, that she would take me to court and make sure I didn't see a penny of the inheritance. My aunts and uncles backed her up, eager for a piece of the fortune. They even tried to turn my father's old friends against me, painting me as a villain. I began receiving harassing phone calls, emails, even visits from people who had heard Sarah's side of the story. They accused me of being a greedy, heartless son, of taking advantage of an old man's weakened state. It was a nightmare, and I felt like I was drowning in their hatred. Despite the accusations, I knew I had done nothing wrong. I had barely spoken to Dad in the months leading up to his death, let alone try to manipulate him. But the pressure from Sarah and the rest of the family was unbearable. I decided to dig into the matter myself, to find out why Dad had made the decision he did. I started by talking to Mr. Thompson. He assured me that the will was legitimate, that my father had been of sound mind when he made it, but that wasn't enough for Sarah. She hired a private investigator, determined to find any dirt she could use against me. The investigator, a man named Carl, started asking questions about my relationship with my father, about the time we spent together, about any financial transactions that might suggest I had manipulated him. It was invasive and humiliating, but I had nothing to hide. As Carl continued his investigation, he began to uncover things about my father that I hadn't known, things that painted a different picture of the man I thought I knew. My father had been a shrewd businessman, but he had also made enemies along the way. There were people who resented him, people who might have wanted to see his will contested, but none of this pointed back to me. If anything, it suggested that Dad had made his decision to protect me from those very people. Weeks passed, and the tension within the family only grew worse. Sarah was becoming more desperate, her attempts to contest the will getting more aggressive. My aunts and uncles, who had once been relatively passive, were now fully on her side, egging her on and feeding her paranoia. Then one day, while I was going through some of Dad's old papers, I found something that changed everything. A letter addressed to me, dated a few months before his death. With trembling hands, I opened it and began to read. "Dear Jack," the letter began, "I know that by the time you read this, I will be gone. I've made decisions that I know will cause conflict, and for that I am sorry. But I need you to understand why I did what I did. I left you the estate because I trust you, Jack. I know you'll do what's right with it. I've seen how you've built your life on your own, how you've made something of yourself without relying on anyone. You've always been independent, and I respect that. As for Sarah and Lily, I know they'll be upset, but they've always had each other, and I've given them more than enough over the years. I hope that in time, they'll come to understand my decision wasn't about favoritism, but about doing what I believe was best for everyone. I love you, son. I know we drifted apart, but I've always been proud of you. I hope you can forgive me for any pain this causes, and that you'll find a way to move forward." The letter left me in tears. It was the closure I didn't know I needed, but it also made me realize how little I had understood my father in those final years. I hadn't been manipulated. He had been trying to protect me, to give me a legacy that he believed I could handle. But now, with the family at war, that legacy felt like a curse. Armed with the letter, I thought about confronting Sarah, but something held me back. Instead, I confided in Mr. Thompson. He advised me to keep the letter private for now, as it could become crucial if the case went to court. I agreed, but the strain was wearing on me. Then one evening, I received a call from Lily. She wanted to meet alone, without Sarah or the rest of the family. I agreed, curious and a little hopeful that maybe she was ready to talk things out. We met at a quiet cafe, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the vulnerable side of my sister. She admitted that she was torn between loyalty to her mother and the nagging feeling that our father had made his decision for a reason. She wanted to understand, to know why Dad had done what he did. I decided to show her the letter. As she read it, tears filled her eyes. I didn't know he felt that way, she whispered. I thought I thought he loved me more than anything. He did love you, Lily, I said gently. But this wasn't about love. It was about trust. He trusted me to handle the estate, to protect it. For a moment, I thought we had reached an understanding, but then to my shock, Lily handed the letter back to me and said, I can't go against Mom. She's convinced you manipulated Dad, and I don't know what to believe. I left the cafe feeling more alone than ever. My own sister had chosen her mother's side despite knowing the truth. It was a betrayal I hadn't expected, and it hurt more than anything Sarah or the rest of the family had done. With Lily's decision, the situation escalated. Sarah, emboldened by her daughter's support, took the matter to court, officially contesting the will. The case was ugly, with accusations flying from both sides. The media caught wind of it, and soon our family drama was splashed across the news. In court, Mr. Thompson defended the will, presenting evidence that Dad had been of sound mind and had made his decision independently. But Sarah's lawyer painted a different picture, one of a son who had schemed and manipulated his father in his final days. The trial dragged on for weeks, the stress taking its toll on me. I had lost weight, couldn't sleep, and felt like I was constantly on the verge of a breakdown. The only thing keeping me going was the letter, my father's words reminding me that he trusted me to do the right thing. Then one day, something unexpected happened. Carl, the private investigator Sarah had hired, came forward with new evidence. He had uncovered documents proving that Sarah had tried to get my father to change his will multiple times in the months before his death. Each time, Dad had refused. The revelation shocked everyone. It painted Sarah in a new light, not as a grieving widow fighting for her daughter's future, but as a manipulative woman who had tried to influence my father's decisions for her own gain. The court ruled in my favor, upholding the will as valid and dismissing Sarah's claim. But the victory felt hollow. The family was shattered, relationships beyond repair. After the trial, I decided to sell the family estate. The memories there were too painful, and I needed a fresh start. With the money, I paid off debts, set up a trust fund for my future, and donated a significant portion to charity in my father's name. Sarah and Lily moved away, cutting off all contact with me. My aunts and uncles, humiliated by the trial, also distanced themselves. I was alone, but for the first time I felt at peace. The battle for the inheritance had been brutal, but it had also taught me a valuable lesson about trust, family, and the true meaning of wealth. As I rebuilt my life, I found solace in the knowledge that my father had believed in me. His last gift wasn't the money or the estate, it was the understanding that I could stand on my own, no matter what challenges came my way. Years later, I met someone special, a woman named Emily, who had also experienced a loss and betrayal in her life. We connected over our shared pain, and slowly, we began to heal each other. We got married, and with the money from the estate, we built a home filled with love, respect, and trust, the very things I had missed growing up. In the end, my father's will wasn't just about money. It was his way of giving me the strength to move forward, to create a new life, and to find happiness despite the darkest of the past. And for that, I will always be grateful.